Welcome to today's deep dive. I'm thrilled to have you with us today because we are looking at one of the most thoroughly documented, endlessly debated figures of the 20th century.
Really one of the biggest.
Yeah, exactly. You, the listener, have probably seen the movies or, read the standard historical summaries. But the material we're diving into today is a massive, incredibly comprehensive biographical excerpt detailing the life of Winston Churchill.
It is a mountain of text.
It really is.
Yeah.
And I want to be clear right out of the gate here. Our mission for this deep dive is not just to repeat the familiar myth of the cigar-chomping roaring lion of World War II.
Right, we've all heard that one.
Exactly. Instead, we're going to use these historical records to cut straight through the noise. We're going to uncover the wild adventures, the colossal blunders, the extreme political flip-flops, and the stark contradictions that built one of the most significant and polarizing figures in modern history.
It's a wild ride.
We're talking about a story that includes literal prison breaks, a politician who changes parties like people change their clothes, and a leader whose greatest rhetorical weapon was actually built from a childhood insecurity.
It really is a sweeping narrative. When you look at the sheer volume of his life, 62 years as a member of parliament, serving under multiple monarchs, participating in wars across multiple continents.
It's exhausting just reading about it.
Truly, it's almost difficult to believe it is the biography of just one person. But reading through these excerpts, what emerges is not some flawless marble statue. It's a portrait of a deeply complex human being whose personal flaws and relentless drive directly shaped global events.
Okay, let's unpack this by starting at the very beginning. Churchill was born into the absolute upper echelons of British society at Blenheim Palace, descending directly from the Dukes of Marlborough. But looking at his early records, he wasn't exactly a prodigy.
No, not at all.
The biographers note that his behavior in school was poor, he wasn't particularly academic, and it actually took him 3 tries just to pass the entrance exam into the Sandhurst Military Academy. He wasn't the natural-born genius of his family's expectations.
And that perceived inadequacy seemed to fuel a massive drive for action. What these documents reveal is a young man driven by a profound hunger for fame, but also driven by a desperate need to outrun his own mind.
The depression.
Yes. He suffered from recurring severe bouts of depression, which he famously referred to as his black dog. To combat this, he embraced writing as what one biographer calls his whole habit.
Wow.
It's something you as a listener might actually relate to today, this idea of throwing yourself entirely into your work or a creative outlet just to keep your own personal demons at bay.
Right.
For Churchill, throughout his entire life, pouring thousands of words onto the page was his primary safeguard against those mental health struggles.
He certainly didn't just write from a quiet, safe study, though. When I was reading through this massive stack of papers, the thing that completely stopped me in my tracks was this story from 1899.
Oh, the Boer War.
Yeah. He's in South Africa during the Second Boer War. He's officially there working as a freelance journalist for the Morning Post, but he's also caught carrying a revolver.
Which is a bit of a conflict of interest.
Just a bit. So he is on an armored train near Colenso when it gets completely derailed by Boer artillery shelling. He's captured, and he makes a formal protest that he's a non-combatant journalist.
Put the gun.
Exactly. His captors essentially look at him and say, "You have a gun? That invalidates your status." And they throw him into a prisoner of war camp in Pretoria.
Which inadvertently sets the stage for the moment that truly launches his public life.
But
because he refused to just sit quietly in a cell.
right, he pulls off this incredible escape. He stows away on freight trains and literally hides deep inside a coal mine to evade capture.
Yeah, deep underground.
Yeah. He eventually makes it to safety in Portuguese East Africa. And the sheer audacity of the exploit brings him massive publicity back home. He leverages that instant fame directly into politics, and by the age of 25, he is elected as a conservative member of parliament.
He was a master at creating his own mythology from a very young age. But what stands out in his early political career is how quickly he demonstrates that he is not bound by party loyalty.
Not at all.
He was fiercely independent and incredibly pragmatic.
Here's where it gets really interesting. He's elected as a conservative in 1900, right? But he quickly starts clashing with his own party over military funding and free trade. So in 1904, he decides to jump ship and joined the Liberal Party.
He literally crossed the floor.
Yes. For anyone unfamiliar with how the British Parliament is laid out, the opposing parties physically sit on benches facing each other. So he didn't just sign a piece of paper behind closed doors. He literally stood up, crossed the floor of the room, and sat down with his former political enemies.
It's incredibly dramatic.
And the kicker is, decades later, he goes right back to the Conservatives.
What's fascinating here is the underlying philosophy driving this shift. Today, Churchill is widely remembered as a conservative icon. But as a young liberal minister working alongside David Lloyd George, he was actually a champion of radical social reform.
Which is hard to picture now.
Very. The biographers suggest this wasn't necessarily a massive shift in his core morals, but a pragmatic calculation. He viewed state intervention as a necessary tool to prevent a socialist revolution.
Give him a little to save the whole system.
Exactly. Give the working class just enough reform to keep the capitalist engine running smoothly. So he introduced the Mines 8 Hours Bill, capping the workday for miners. He helped pass the Trade Boards Bill, establishing the principle of a minimum wage, and pushed for early unemployment insurance through labor exchanges.
It is a total whiplash to think of him laying the foundation for the modern welfare state. And while he's championing these progressive social reforms, he's also engaging in a deeply reckless, hands-on approach to leadership.
The Sydney Street Incident.
Yes, help me understand this part of the text. Take the 1911 siege of Sydney Street. At this point, Churchill is the Home Secretary, which means he's the government minister in charge of domestic law and order. 3 Latvian burglars shoot some police officers and barricade themselves in a house in London's East End.
A very tense standoff.
And Churchill actually goes to the scene. He stands there in a top hat watching a live gunfight. And when the building catches fire, he controversially orders the fire brigade to stand down. He literally decides to let the building burn down rather than risk the lives of British police to rescue what he called those ferocious rascals. 2 of the burglars die in the fire.
It highlights his absolute refusal to delegate during a crisis. He wanted to be at the center of the action, making the life-or-death decisions in real time, often bypassing the actual commanders on the ground.
Micromanaging to the extreme.
Exactly. But that exact same supreme confidence, that belief in his own strategic brilliance, is what leads to his most devastating failures.
Which brings us to World War I. He is serving as First Lord of the Admiralty, meaning he's the political head of the Royal Navy. He comes up with this grand vision to relieve pressure on the Russian army by staging a massive naval and military assault against Turkey.
The Dardanelles.
Right. The strategy was to force a passage through the Dardanelles, a narrow strait in northwestern Turkey, hoping to sail right up and seize the capital, Constantinople. It becomes known as the Gallipoli Campaign, and it is a catastrophic disaster both logistically and politically.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Gallipoli is the moment that proves his career was defined by extreme highs and devastating lows. The campaign failed at immense human cost.
Yeah, it was brutal.
The naval bombardment didn't work, the troops were pinned down on the beaches for months, and Churchill was held personally responsible by many in Parliament for pushing the strategy so aggressively. When a new coalition government was formed in 1915, the conservative condition for joining was that Churchill had to be removed from the Admiralty.
Ouch.
He was demoted, and eventually he resigned from the government in utter disgrace.
But this is where the historical record completely surprised me. After resigning in disgrace, what does he do? He doesn't go hide in a comfortable country estate or immediately start writing memoirs to defend himself. He asks to go to the front lines.
He volunteers.
He goes straight to the Western Front in Belgium. He serves as a major and then a lieutenant colonel commanding the Royal Scots Fusiliers. He's out there in the mud, facing continual artillery shelling. The text even details a moment where he narrowly escapes death when a massive piece of shrapnel falls right between him and his cousin during a trench visit.
Consider how modern leaders handle public disgrace or a massive professional failure today. Often, it involves a carefully managed PR retreat.
Definitely. A ghost-written apology and a quiet board seat.
Right. But Churchill's response to a massive strategic failure was to literally jump into the deadly trenches of the Western Front alongside the soldiers. It was an act of personal penance, but it was also a testament to his unbreakable resilience. He simply refused to be counted out.
And he needed that resilience, because that exact same stubborn refusal to back down is what positioned him for the next era of his life. We move into the 1930s, a period famously known as his wilderness years.
A very dark time for him personally.
Yeah, he's out of power, heavily isolated, and battling the black dog of depression once again. But he becomes this lone, relentless voice of warning. While the British government is practicing a policy of appeasement, essentially making political concessions to Hitler in the hopes of avoiding another war, Churchill is doing the exact opposite.
And he was doing it with heavily guarded information.
Yeah.
He was using clandestinely provided data smuggled to him by senior civil servants like Desmond Morton and Ralph Wigram to sound the alarm in Parliament about Nazi Germany and the rapid buildup of the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe.
So he had the receipts.
He absolutely did. He was taking these secret numbers and publicly hammering the government over their lack of preparedness.
He was sounding an alarm that very few wanted to hear. But the timeline the biographers lay out here is just chilling. Following the disaster of the Norwegian campaign in May 1940, Neville Chamberlain's government loses the confidence of the House.
The tipping point.
Chamberlain resigns, and Churchill becomes prime minister on the exact same day that Hitler launches his massive invasion of Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. The crisis he spent a decade predicting had arrived at their doorstep.
And he was the only man left who had the credibility to lead the country through it. He had to convince a deeply frightened public and some very hesitant members of his own cabinet that negotiating a peace deal with Hitler was absolutely not an option.
And to do that, we see his absolute greatest tool put to work, his rhetoric. But the reading gives us this incredible behind-the-scenes detail about his voice. Churchill actually had a childhood speech impediment.
A lateral lisp.
Yeah, he struggled to pronounce the letters without a slur. He worked relentlessly, practicing specific phrases for years to turn this impediment into an asset. The text specifically notes how he used it to deliberately mispronounce and mock the word Nazi, stretching it out into Nazi to show his utter contempt for Hitler.
It's a brilliant psychological tactic. He refused to grant the enemy the dignity of their proper name. And the words he chose during those terrifying weeks of 1940 were vital.
The quotes from these speeches are legendary for a reason. His very first speech to the House of Commons as Prime Minister laid out the brutal reality. I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears, and sweat.
Uncompromising.
Completely. And then a few weeks later, after the miracle of the Dunkirk evacuation where they barely rescued the British Army, he delivers the definitive statement of defiance. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets.
Yeah.
We shall never surrender. He used words to literally harden the spine of a nation standing entirely alone against a seemingly invincible war machine.
This raises an important question, though, and it's a question these comprehensive biographical excerpts do not shy away from. How do we, as readers and students of history, view a figure whose undeniable heroics sit right alongside deeply controversial beliefs and devastating actions?
Yeah, it gets complicated fast.
Because the same man who stood as the bulwark of liberal democracy in 1940 was also responsible for policies and views that are incredibly difficult to reconcile.
That is a crucial point. And before we dive into this next section, I want to make it absolutely clear to you, the listener, that we are not taking sides or passing moral judgment here. We are impartially laying out the facts exactly as they are presented in historical text.
Just reading the record.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the text details some truly dark chapters. For instance, the Bengal famine of 1943.
Yeah.
Between 2.1 and 3.8 million people died in British India. The biographers detail how this was caused by a complex combination of crop failure, natural disasters, and wartime inflation.
A massive tragedy.
However, the text also states that Churchill's government drew severe criticism for refusing some urgent requests for vital grain imports. The government cited an acute shortage of shipping due to the global war effort, though the text does note that Churchill did eventually order some shipments of hundreds of thousands of tons of grain late in 1943.
The reading also dedicates significant time to the immense controversy surrounding the area bombing of German cities, specifically the bombing of Dresden in February 1945.
Right.
This was an attack initiated by Churchill's government with the intention of destroying infrastructure and shortening the war, but it resulted in a devastating civilian tragedy. An independent commission later confirmed roughly 24,000 deaths from the firestorm.
It's staggering.
What is telling in the documents is that Churchill himself later tried to distance himself from the campaign, writing a memo to the chiefs of staff where he questioned what he called the mere acts of terror and wanton destruction.
And then there are his personal views on race and empire, which the biographers explore in significant depth. Churchill was a staunch imperialist who believed the British Empire was a force for good. And he consistently opposed non-white self-rule in places like India, Africa, and the Caribbean.
He was very vocal about it.
The text quotes him famously disparaging Mohandas Gandhi, referring to him as a seditious Middle Temple lawyer now posing as a fakir.
And we should clarify those terms for context. Middle Temple is a highly elite legal institution in London. Churchill was essentially mocking Gandhi by pointing out that he wasn't a humble, mystical, holy man, which is what a fakir is, but rather a highly educated, wealthy, British-trained lawyer playing a part to stir up rebellion.
Ah, I see.
It was a deeply dismissive view of the Indian independence movement.
Furthermore, the text cites a letter he wrote much earlier, in 1910, when he was Home Secretary. In it, he supported the forced sterilization of the feeble-minded, describing their growth as a national and race danger.
It's deeply uncomfortable history to read, but it's essential history. You cannot fully understand the 20th century without understanding the mindset of the people who shaped it.
No, you really can't.
Churchill was a man born in the Victorian era, holding imperialist and racial views that were extreme even to some of his contemporaries, while simultaneously being the vital architect of the defeat of fascism.
So what does this all mean? Our goal with this deep dive isn't to tell you how to feel about him, but to present the raw text. And the text reveals a man of intense, almost unbelievable contradictions.
Pendulum swings.
Right. You have the young, adventurous prisoner of war who escapes across South Africa. You have the political pragmatist who switches parties to champion the rights of the working class. You have the disgraced military planner of Gallipoli who seeks his penance in the muddy trenches of World War I.
And the defiance.
You have the resolute, defiant wartime leader whose rhetoric quite literally saved his nation from tyranny. And you have the fiercely imperialist leader whose controversial decisions and racial views leave a deeply complicated legacy. His life was a massive pendulum swinging continuously between these extremes.
And that pendulum swing leads right into one final fascinating detail from the biographical material that we haven't discussed yet, and something I want to leave you, the listener, to ponder on your own.
Oh, this is a good one.
In May 1945, Churchill led the United Kingdom through its darkest hour to absolute victory in Europe. He stood on the balcony of Buckingham Palace to the deafening cheers of a massive crowd. Yet, just 2 months later, in July 1945, the British public held a general election and unceremoniously voted his party out of power in a massive landslide.
They just kicked him out.
He was replaced as prime minister almost immediately. Why does a nation discard its greatest wartime savior at the exact moment peace is declared? Consider what that tells you about the profound difference between the leader we need to survive a brutal crisis and the leader we want to build a peaceful future.
It is a brilliant question to end on. Thank you so much for joining us as we unpack the many lives and contradictions of Winston Churchill. We hope this deep dive gave you some new perspectives to chew on and explore further. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and take care.
Thank you for listening. Goodbye.